Imagine standing at the gate of a bustling airport, hand in hand with your 6-year-old daughter, excitement filling the air. This should be a day of joy, her very first flight, a journey to visit her grandmother. But instead, tears stream down her face as a flight attendant points toward the exit, telling her she must leave. What could possibly make this innocent child the target of such harsh treatment? And how far will a determined father go to protect his daughter's dignity and demand justice? Camden Roy is no ordinary passenger. A seasoned commercial airline pilot with years of experience, a former Air Force officer, and a devoted single father. He knows all too well the unspoken battles faced in the skies. When Nia is unjustly removed during boarding, his calm but unwavering response sets off a chain of events that will shake an entire airline, ignite conversations about racism, and inspire change. What happens when a personal heartbreak becomes a catalyst for systemic reform? How does one family's ordeal shine a light on the deep-rooted biases that still haunt everyday life, even above the clouds? Join us as we follow Camden and Nia's powerful journey. A story of resilience, courage, and hope that will make you rethink what justice truly means. If you believe in standing up for what's right, hit like, share this video, and subscribe now to hear more stories that matter. The sun had just started to climb above the rooftops of Mapleton Heights, painting the sky in soft hues of peach and blue. In a small second-floor apartment overlooking a quiet street, the scent of cinnamon toast and warm oatmeal lingered in the air. 7-year-old Nia Roy stood barefoot in the hallway, clutching a worn stuffed bunny in one hand and peeking into her father's room. "Daddy," she whispered, barely audible. Camden Roy, already dressed in a neatly pressed polo and slacks, turned from his suitcase and smiled. "Morning, Captain Nia," he said gently. "Ready for your first mission." Nia giggled sleepily. Stepping in, she wore her favorite T-shirt, the one with little airplanes embroidered across the hem, and a pair of soft yellow leggings her grandmother had sewn for her birthday. In her arms, the stuffed bunny, named Commander Poppy, wore a handmade pilot's cap Camden had crafted from an old patch of uniform. "I dreamed I was flying," Nia said, climbing onto the bed, "but not in a real plane. It was like a pillow with wings." Camden chuckled. "Well, today we're trading the pillow for something a little bigger. Boeing 737. You'll love it." Today wasn't just any travel day. It was Nia's first ever flight. And not just any flight. It was also the first time she'd be visiting her grandmother in Denver since her mother passed away. Camden had once been a decorated pilot in the U.S. Air Force. Now, at 41, he was a respected commercial pilot with Horizon Vista Airlines. Although he wasn't assigned to fly this trip, he had used his employee privileges to book 2 first-class seats for himself and Nia. He wanted her to feel safe, comfortable, and maybe even fall in love with flying the way he had when he was a child. He walked into the kitchen, poured Nia a glass of orange juice, and placed 2 slices of toast on a plate. Nia followed him, still half asleep but bubbling with anticipation underneath. "Daddy," she asked, sitting at the table, "will I get to see the cockpit I talked to the captain flying today?" Camden replied, "If all goes well, you'll get to see every single button." Nia beamed. Even the ones that make the wings flap, Camden grinned. Even those. There was a stillness between them for a moment, the kind that often followed their memories of someone who wasn't there anymore. Camden's hand brushed the picture on the windowsill, a framed photo of Mariah, Nia's mother, holding Nia at just a few months old. She had passed from breast cancer 2 years ago, and since then, Camden had reshaped his entire life around raising Nia. His flight schedule became flexible, his home more child-centered, and his outlook quieter, more inward. Nia glanced at the picture too. "Do you think Mommy would have liked the plane?" "I think she would have loved sitting beside you," Camden said, his voice low. "And she'd probably asked to sit by the window. She always did." Nia nodded, then, softer, "I wish she was coming." Camden leaned over and kissed the top of her head. "She is. Just not in the seat next to us." They finished breakfast quietly, then returned to the hallway where Camden knelt to zip up their carry-on suitcase. He double-checked Nia's backpack coloring books, a small snack box, a pair of pink headphones, and Commander Poppy tucked carefully inside. Nia watched every move intently. "I brought my storybook," she said proudly. "The one with the flying girl." Camden paused. "The one who flies, even though they told her she wasn't supposed to." Nia nodded. "Because she didn't listen to the mean people. She just listened to her heart." Camden smiled slowly. "That's a good book to bring." They ordered a cab just after 8. The driver, a kind woman named Miss Darlene, recognized Camden right away. "You're one of them pilots for Horizon, right?" she asked as she helped them load their bags. "Yes, ma'am," Camden replied with a nod. "Always nice seeing folks like you up there. You know, representation matters." Camden smiled, but it was a complicated one. Representation did matter, but so did how he was treated behind the scenes. Promotions delayed without reason. Passengers assuming he was security, or worse, baggage staff. His years of flying had hardened his professionalism, but they hadn't dulled the quiet sting of being seen as out of place in a seat he'd earned. As they drove toward Palmwood International Airport, Nia pressed her nose to the window, watching planes rise into the air like giant silver birds. "Do you think they're scared when they take off?" she asked. "The planes?" Camden asked. Amused, she giggled. "No, the people." He paused, thoughtful. "Some are, but the best part is, the moment the wheels lift off the ground, that fear, it turns into something else. Just wait till you feel it." Nia smiled at the idea and hugged Commander Poppy tighter. They arrived at the terminal just past 8:30. Camden held Nia's hand as they entered the bustle of travelers, announcements echoing over the intercom, rolling suitcases trailing behind suited professionals, tired parents, and couples en route to something warmer. Nia stayed close, eyes wide, taking it all in. "It's like a city, but with wings." Camden laughed. "You're going to make a great writer if you don't become a pilot." At the check-in kiosk, Camden scanned their reservation and printed the boarding passes. First class, Gate C12, departure in an hour. They had time. As they headed towards security, Camden took a deep breath. He always felt a little guarded during this part. Nia, blissfully unaware, skipped alongside him. He deeply hoped this trip would be as joyful and unblemished for her as she imagined. He had done everything right, prepared, dressed professionally, chose first class, spoke to the captain in advance. Still, some things could never be planned for. Some things, he had learned, were waiting at every checkpoint, every uniformed glance. Every "can I see that again" said a little too sharp. But today, he reminded himself, was for her, for Nia, for the memory of Mariah, and for the promise that she'd fly through life knowing exactly who she was, no matter who tried to doubt it. The moment they stepped into Palmwood International Airport, Nia's hand tightened around Camden's. Her eyes were wide again, full of curiosity. The terminal buzzed with energy, bright digital screens blinking departure times, coffee machines hissing in the background, and overhead announcements weaving through the hum of conversations. Camden scanned the room instinctively. Years of flying had trained him to do so. Locate security exits. Notice any unusual movement. Scan for sudden changes in tone or posture. But this time, he wasn't here as a pilot. He was just a father. And all he wanted was for this to be a peaceful morning for Nia. "Do you think there's a candy shop in here?" Nia asked, hopping as she walked. "The kind that sells those rainbow lollipops?" Camden smiled. "I think we might find one if we get through security quickly." Nia grinned and marched ahead with her little backpack, the bunny ears of Commander Poppy peeking out from the zipper. Her joy was uncontainable. And Camden, watching her from behind, felt a swell of something sacred love, protectiveness, and a flicker of worry. The TSA security line was moving steadily, though the sight of it made Nia frown. "Do we have to take off our shoes?" "Just you and me," Camden replied. "But it's quick, like hopping on one foot." She giggled, hopping once to demonstrate. Camden guided her through the ropes. When it was their turn, they were waved forward by a tall TSA agent with a badge reading Phillips. Camden handed over both passports and their boarding passes. The agent scanned them without much expression until his eyes flicked to Camden's face, then down to Nia's. "You traveling together?" the agent asked, looking directly at Camden. "Yes," Camden answered evenly. "She yours?" "Yes." "My daughter." The man didn't smile. Instead, he stared at the passes again, and then at Nia, who was now hopping on one foot in place. "Step aside a moment," the agent said, nodding to a secondary area. Camden kept his voice calm. "Is there an issue? Just need to verify something. Routine check." Camden looked down at Nia, who had stopped hopping. He crouched beside her. "Just a small detour. Nothing to worry about." Nia nodded, still watching the agent closely. In the secondary screening area, another officer joined them. This one had a softer expression, but said nothing as Camden was asked again about his relationship to Nia. He calmly handed over her birth certificate, tucked safely into a folder in his carry-on. Just in case. The same way he always had to be, just in case. The officers reviewed the document, then returned it silently. "You're clear," one finally said. Camden nodded. "Thank you." As they walked away, Nia looked up at him. "Why did they look at you like that?" Camden didn't answer at first. They walked a few paces before he gently said, "Sometimes, baby, people ask extra questions when things don't look the way they expect." Nia frowned. "What do you mean?" Camden took a breath. "I mean, when people carry ideas in their head about what families look like, and if they see something different, it confuses them." "But we're not confusing," Nia said plainly. "No." He said, "We're not." She reached up and took his hand again. That man didn't smile. He was kinda mean. Camden didn't disagree, but he also didn't want to weigh her heart down with his. Not yet. She had a whole day ahead of her, and he wasn't going to let that moment set the tone. They found a candy shop near their gate after all. Camden let her pick out a small rainbow lollipop while he grabbed a black coffee. He smiled watching her skip ahead of him, lollipop in hand, her curls bouncing with each step. Her joy was a shield, one he would protect at all costs. Gate C-12 came into view. A cluster of people were already lining up before the boarding announcement. Some business travelers, a few families with kids, and a couple dressed in matching Denver Broncos gear. Camden approached the gate agent, a tall man with silver-streaked hair and a pressed uniform. His name tag read, Travis Moore. He wore a practiced smile that barely touched his eyes. "Good morning," Camden greeted him. We're checked in, just wanted to confirm any early boarding for employee travel. Travis took the boarding passes without looking up right away. When he finally did, his eyes lingered on Camden, then on Nia. "Are you," he started, squinting slightly. "Flying standby?" No, Camden replied calmly. "These are confirmed first-class seats, booked under my Horizon Vista employee benefit." Travis examined the passes again. "Just a moment." He turned away and began typing into his computer. Nia leaned into Camden. "Are we still flying first class?" "We are," he said softly. Travis frowned at the screen, then glanced back at them. "Just running a quick check." Camden raised an eyebrow. "Everything should be in order. I've flown before under this benefit." Travis nodded absently, but kept typing. A white couple stepped beside them holding similar passes. Travis barely looked at theirs before gesturing them through. "Group 1, you're good to go." Camden watched quietly. Another minute passed. Finally, Travis printed a small slip and handed it back to Camden. "Okay, you're clear." "Thank you," Camden said, guiding Nia to the side as the gate pre-boarding announcement began. They found a seat near the gate, and Camden sat back, watching Nia unwrap her lollipop with deep focus. A woman across from them stared for a moment too long, her eyes scanning Camden's dark skin, his crisp clothes, then Nia's small frame curled next to him. He felt it again, that weight, the quiet judgment, the invisible hands measuring whether he belonged in the seats he paid for, in the role he was living, in the presence of the daughter he loved. Nia rested her head on his arm. "I can't wait to go up in the sky." He kissed her forehead. Almost time. Over the intercom, boarding was announced. Camden and Nia rose, joining the short first-class line. Behind them, more murmurs. Ahead of them, another quick glance from Travis. But this time, he said nothing, just scanned the pass and waved them through. Camden's voice was steady. "Thank you." As they walked down the jet bridge, the light dimmed slightly. The hum of the plane's engines grew louder. Nia bounced slightly with every step. "I can hear it breathing," she whispered. Camden smiled. "That's just the engines warming up, like stretching before flying." "Exactly." He reached for her hand again as they neared the plane's door. His grip was gentle but firm. Inside, the cabin lights glowed softly. The air smelled of citrus cleaner and coffee. A female flight attendant stood at the entrance, greeting each passenger. Camden caught her name on the badge, Darla Benson. She smiled at the couple ahead of them, wished them a warm welcome. Then she looked at Camden and Nia. The smile dropped a degree. Her posture straightened. "Can I help you?" she asked. Camden remained composed. "We're in 2A and 2B. She looked at the boarding passes, then at Camden. "You're together?" "Yes. My daughter." Darla's eyes moved to Nia, then back. "All right," she said after a pause. "Seats are on the left." Camden didn't flinch. He guided Nia in without a word. As they reached their row, Nia looked up at him and whispered. She didn't smile much. Camden's smile returned, soft but clear. "Sometimes people forget how," he said, "but that doesn't mean we do." They settled in. Nia placed Commander Poppy between the seats. Camden fastened her seatbelt carefully, then his own. He looked out the window for a moment and exhaled deeply. The sky was still theirs, no matter what waited next. The first-class cabin hummed with quiet anticipation. Soft jazz played overhead, blending into the shuffle of carry-ons and the low murmur of passengers settling into wide, plush seats. Camden helped Nia tuck her backpack under the seat, then adjusted the safety belt across her lap. She wiggled in excitement. Is it always this comfy? Camden smiled. Only in first class. Don't get too used to it. She giggled and leaned over to pull down the window shade just halfway. I want to see the sky, but not too much. Camden chuckled, took off his jacket, and laid it carefully across the empty armrest between them. A flight attendant walked by, offering water. Camden accepted 2 cups, handing one to Nia. Thank you, she said sweetly, drawing a soft nod from the attendant. Camden leaned back and allowed himself a brief moment of calm. Everything was in place. Bags stowed. Nia content. The pilot had already announced a minor delay but promised a smooth departure. This was supposed to be a good memory for her. A moment that lived in her scrapbook of childhood. That's all he wanted. Then he noticed Darla Benson, the lead flight attendant, hovering at the front of the cabin. She was whispering to a colleague while glancing back toward them. Her voice was low, but her posture was stiff, and her brows furrowed. Camden didn't flinch. He was used to that look. The hushed conference, the back-and-forth glances, the doubt that crept into people's eyes when his skin didn't match their assumptions about his seat or his daughter. He reached over and gently smoothed Nia's curls as she sipped her water. Completely unaware. Darla approached a moment later. Sir, she said, her voice light but lined with something harder. Can I see your boarding passes again? Camden met her eyes. We already boarded. You scanned them at the gate? I know. Just need to verify something. Camden reached into his coat and calmly handed her the passes. She examined them like they might be forged. And she's traveling with you, Darla asked, nodding at Nia. Yes, Camden replied. She's my daughter. Darla's eyes narrowed slightly. Do you have identification for her? Camden didn't answer right away. He looked down at Nia, who had paused mid-sip, watching them now. Then, without a word, Camden retrieved the folder from his carry-on and handed over the birth certificate again. Darla took it with visible hesitation. Read it. Then looked at Nia. You understand, she said, as if trying to soften the tension. We just have to be cautious about unaccompanied minors. She's not unaccompanied, Camden replied gently. She's sitting right next to her father. There was silence. Darla hesitated, then gave a tight nod and handed everything back. Thank you, she said shortly, and walked off. Nia looked up at him. Did I do something wrong? Camden turned to her, his face softening. No, baby, not at all. She looked worried. Then why did she look so mad? He reached for her hand. Some people get confused when they see something they don't expect. But we know who we are. That's what matters. Nia nodded slowly. Still processing. Camden glanced toward the front of the plane. Darla had returned to the galley and was now speaking with someone wearing a captain's bars on his shoulders. Tall, with a salt and pepper beard. Captain Carl Vance. Camden knew that name. He had flown with him once, years ago. A decent pilot, conservative, strict, but competent. He could see Captain Vance's expression shift slightly as Darla spoke. A small frown appeared. He said something in return. Darla gestured in Camden's direction. Camden sat still. A moment later, the captain disappeared back into the cockpit. Daddy Nia whispered, Are we still going to fly? Camden nodded. Yes. Nothing's going to stop us. But even as he said it, he could feel something shifting in the air. Not turbulence. Something deeper. He had the sense that this wasn't over. The plane began boarding the final passengers. The rows behind them filled up quickly. A woman in a navy blazer mid-50s, short blonde hair. Strong perfume stopped in the aisle and glanced at their row. She looked at Camden, then at Nia, then back at Camden. "Oh," she said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. Camden kept his eyes forward. She stowed her coat in the overhead bin and sat across the aisle. Her expression was tight. A few minutes later, she pressed the flight attendant button. Darla returned. "Yes, Ms. Langford." Camden noted the name. Joanna Langford. He recognized the type. Privileged, entitled, quietly sharp. Joanna spoke in a low tone. "Is it appropriate to seat a child next to someone who may not be her guardian?" Camden heard every word. Darla glanced back at Camden and Nia, as if trying to assess how much had been overheard. "She's with her father," Darla said curtly. "Are you sure?" Joanna asked. "These days, you really can't assume." Darla's face hardened. "It's been verified." Joanna gave a small, tight smile and turned back in her seat. Nia had gone quiet. She was no longer sipping her water, just holding the cup with both hands, her gaze fixed on the back of the seat in front of her. Camden leaned in. "Want to play spy?" She didn't answer at first, then nodded slightly. "I spy with my little eye. Something blue," he whispered. She looked up at him and tried to smile. "Your shirt." He smiled. "Got it in one." They continued the game, soft and slow, as the plane filled. But inside, Camden was weighing every moment, the stairs, the gate delays, the birth certificate check, the quiet doubt lodged in someone else's eyes. He had spent his life navigating these spaces with dignity. But today was for her, and every glance, every question, every insinuation, he felt it land not on him, but on her, and that was harder to carry. The plane doors finally closed. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Carl Vance. We've been cleared for pushback in approximately 15 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened as we prepare for taxi." Nia clapped softly. "We're going soon." Camden nodded. "We are." He leaned back and exhaled, one hurdle down. But just as he reached for his coffee, Darla returned. "Mr. Roy," she said quietly. He turned to her. "I need to speak with you, privately." He blinked. "I'm sorry," he asked, his voice calm but firmer now. "In the galley? It'll just take a moment." Nia looked up, alarmed. "It's okay," Camden said to her gently. "I'll be right back." He stood and followed Darla to the front galley, just out of view for most passengers. A small service area, silver cabinets, polished surfaces. The scent of coffee lingered. Captain Vance was waiting. "Camden Roy," he said with a nod. Camden returned it. "Captain Vance." The captain cleared his throat. "I understand there was some confusion earlier about your seating." Camden raised an eyebrow. "Not on my part." Vance didn't smile. "A passenger has expressed concern. She believes your child might be flying without proper supervision." Camden's jaw tightened slightly. "You have my daughter's documents. We've boarded legally. We are in our assigned seats." Vance nodded. "I don't doubt that. But protocol requires us to investigate any safety concerns raised." "Whose safety is in question?" Camden asked. "Hers or yours?" Vance was silent for a beat. Then he spoke carefully. "If you don't comply, I will be forced to escalate this to airport security." Camden stared at him, then slowly nodded. "I suggest," he said quietly, "you check your manifest and your assumptions." Then he turned and walked back to his seat. Nia looked up as he returned. "Is everything okay?" He buckled in beside her. "For now," he said. "But if anything changes, Daddy's here." The plane sat still on the tarmac, engines humming softly but not yet roaring to life. Through the small oval windows, Camden could see the wet runway stretching into the gray morning mist. Outside, the airport was alive with movement fuel trucks, baggage handlers, and ground crew all in constant motion. Inside, however, tension was thick and invisible, settling in the quiet spaces between passengers and crew. Camden glanced at Nia, who was quietly drawing in her coloring book with the steady focus only a child could summon. Her tiny hand traced the lines of an airplane, the colors vivid and joyful, but her brows furrowed as if trying to make sense of something larger than herself. He felt a pang of sorrow. How much of this was she truly understanding? How much did he need to shield her from his own thoughts were interrupted by the low chime of the intercom? "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a security concern, we will be delayed on the ground for approximately 15 minutes. We apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate your patience." The voice was calm but firm, not revealing the tension simmering just beneath the surface. Camden's stomach clenched. Security concern. The words echoed in his mind with a heavy weight. He looked up and caught Darla's eyes from across the aisle. Her smile was tight, almost forced. She avoided his gaze. Nia looked up at her father. "Daddy, why aren't we moving?" "We will soon." "Zoe," Camden said softly. He leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "Sometimes the plane has to wait before it can fly." Her fingers tightened around Commander Poppy's ear. "Is everything okay?" He hesitated, wanting to tell her the truth, but knowing she was too young to carry the weight of the world. "Everything's fine, baby," he said finally. "Daddy's here." The minutes stretched. Cabin crew moved through the aisles quietly, offering blankets and snacks. The atmosphere was oddly subdued, as if everyone was sensing the undercurrent of something more serious. Camden's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down to see a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Roy. This is James Patterson from Horizon Vista Management. I've been briefed on the situation. Please stay calm. We are handling this. I'll be at the airport shortly." Camden typed a quick reply, grateful for the support but aware that the battle had only just begun. He closed his eyes briefly, breathing deeply. This was more than a delay. It was a test. The door near the cockpit opened, and Captain Carl Vance stepped out, his face grim. He walked down the aisle, stopping at Camden's row. "Mr. Roy," he said quietly, "I'm sorry, but I need to ask you and your daughter to leave the aircraft." Camden's eyes widened. "Excuse me, the crew has received complaints about disruptive behavior, and airport security has been notified. Until this is resolved, you will need to deplane." Nia's face scrunched in confusion. "Disruptive? But we didn't do anything wrong." Camden stood slowly, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "I understand, Captain, but I'd like to see the evidence of this disruption." Captain Vance's jaw tightened. "Sir, the decision is final. Please comply." Camden's heart pounded. He scanned the cabin. Passengers were watching, some with curiosity, others with uncomfortable silence. A few were discreetly filming the exchange. "Captain," Camden said, voice steady but firm, "my daughter spilled a few drops of juice earlier. That is hardly cause for removal. I'd appreciate a reconsideration." The captain looked past him, toward Darla and another flight attendant. Their expressions were unreadable. Joanna Langford, the woman seated across the aisle, shifted in her seat. She whispered something to a nearby passenger. eyes locked on Camden and Nia. Camden felt the sting of judgment, of silent accusation. He knelt down to Nia's level. "Baby, sometimes people don't like what they see. But remember, you did nothing wrong." Tears welled in Nia's eyes, and she hugged Commander Poppy tightly. The captain cleared his throat. "I cannot overrule security. If you refuse to deplane, I will have no choice but to involve law enforcement." Camden's mind raced. The implications were clear. This was about more than spilled juice. It was about the discomfort his presence and his daughter's presence caused to some on board. He looked around again. The whispers, the pointed glances, the way the cabin had shifted since they boarded. He stood slowly, taking Nia's hand firmly in his. "We will deplane," he said quietly. "But this is not the end of this conversation." Passengers murmured softly. A woman sitting several rows back whispered, "That's not right." Another voice chimed in, "It's discrimination." Camden walked down the aisle with Nia beside him, holding her close. At the door, Darla blocked their path. "Wait," she said sharply. "You can't take the stuffed animal." Nia's eyes filled with panic. Captain Poppy Camden stepped forward. We're leaving. Let her have her bunny." Darla hesitated but stepped aside. The jet bridge felt longer than it was. Nia's sobs were quiet but heart-wrenching. Camden held her tight. "I promise. Zoe, we're going to make this right." As they reached the terminal floor, airport security approached. A tall and broad man in a dark uniform stepped forward. "Mr. Roy," he said, "please come with us." Camden's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Of course." Nia clung to his leg, looking up with wide eyes. "Come on, baby," Camden whispered. "We'll be back soon." Security led them to a small office nearby. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Camden sat beside Nia, who was wiping tears from her cheeks. He pulled out his phone and dialed James Patterson. "We're here," he said. "What's the next step?" James's voice came through with calm reassurance. "I'm at the airport now. We're reviewing the footage. Hold tight." Camden turned to Nia. "You're brave," he said softly. She smiled weakly. "Daddy, do you think people will understand?" "I hope so," he said. "And if they don't, we'll keep showing them." Back near the gate, news was spreading quickly. Passengers whispered and exchanged glances. Several had recorded parts of the incident and were posting videos on their phones. The hashtag #OakRoyFlightIncident was already trending. At the Horizon Vista offices, Whitney Graves, the airline CEO, was alerted immediately. Her expression was grave as she read the reports and watched the footage. She called an emergency meeting with senior staff. "This is unacceptable," Whitney said firmly. "We must address this immediately, not just for the Roy family, but for every passenger who has ever felt marginalized." Her eyes flicked to the live social media feed. "We will ground Flight 423 until this is resolved, and we will hold every individual accountable." At the airport, Camden and Nia were finally reunited with James Patterson. The regional director's presence brought a measure of calm. "Camden, we're with you on this," James said. "We'll ensure your daughter's safety and dignity." Camden nodded gratefully. "Thank you, James. This is bigger than us now." Later that day, Captain Vance, Darla Benson, and Travis Moore were called into a private meeting. The evidence of discriminatory treatment was clear. They faced suspension pending investigation. Camden sat in the lounge with Nia, watching her draw another picture of a plane, this one with a father and daughter flying together, unafraid and free. He knew the fight wasn't over, but for now, they had won a moment of peace. The airport lounge was busy, filled with travelers waiting for their flights. But Camden and Naya sat quietly in a corner, shielded from the noise by a wall and a few potted plants. Nia was coloring, Commander Poppy safely beside her, while Camden stared at the muted television mounted on the wall, which was now displaying breaking news about the incident on Flight 423. The screen showed a grainy video of the moment when Camden and Nia were asked to leave the plane. Passengers' shocked faces flashed across the screen, mixed with the stern expressions of the flight crew. The reporter's voice was calm but serious as she described what had unfolded: allegations of racial discrimination, the airline's swift response, and the growing outrage on social media. Camden exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. His mind was racing, but he tried to focus on Naya. She seemed calm, absorbed in her drawing, but he knew the weight of the day was pressing on her young shoulders. "You okay, baby?" he asked softly. Nia looked up and smiled faintly. "I'm okay, Daddy. But why did they make us leave if we didn't do anything wrong?" Camden felt the familiar ache in his chest. Explaining systemic racism to a 7-year-old was never easy. He chose his words carefully. Sometimes, people make decisions based on fear or misunderstanding. They see what's different and get uncomfortable. But that doesn't mean we should stop being ourselves. Nia nodded thoughtfully. "I don't want to be different if it means people won't like me." Camden pulled her close. "You are wonderful, just the way you are. Zoe. And anyone who can't see that isn't worth your worry." She hugged him tightly, then went back to her coloring. He smiled and turned back to the TV. Across the country, voices were rising. News outlets covered the story extensively, and social media buzzed with reactions. Celebrities, activists, and everyday people shared their support for Camden and Nia, condemning the treatment they had endured. A video of Camden's calm and measured response went viral, capturing hearts and inspiring calls for change. His dignity in the face of injustice became a beacon for many who had faced similar discrimination. Camden's phone buzzed with messages of encouragement from colleagues, friends, and strangers alike. The pilots' union issued a statement condemning the incident and calling for stricter anti-discrimination policies within airlines. Despite the growing support, Camden knew the fight ahead would be long and difficult. The airline had suspended the involved crew members, but systemic issues ran deep. He thought about the countless times in his career he had been questioned, scrutinized, or doubted because of the color of his skin. How many others had silently suffered without a voice? As the hours passed, a press conference was arranged at the airport. Whitney Graves, Horizon Vista's CEO, stood at the podium, flanked by senior executives and the newly appointed Chief Diversity Officer, Marissa Lee. Whitney's tone was firm and resolute. She apologized publicly for the incident, acknowledging the airline's failure to provide equal treatment and promising a comprehensive review of policies and training. Marissa Lee outlined immediate steps to implement mandatory anti-bias training and establish clearer procedures to protect passengers from discrimination. Camden watched the broadcast, feeling a mix of relief and cautious hope. Later that evening, as the terminal quieted, Camden sat with Nia on a bench near the boarding gates. Her small hand rested in his, and she looked up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy, will we fly again soon?" "Absolutely, baby. And next time, nothing will stop us." She smiled, and he knew this was just the beginning. For Nia, for himself, and for countless others, the road to true equality in the skies was long but necessary. The early morning light filtered softly through the large windows of Palmwood International Airport as passengers began to reassemble at Gate C-12. After hours of delay and uncertainty, the announcement came through the intercom flight 423 to Atlanta was preparing to board again, this time with a replacement crew and new hopes for a smoother journey. Camden sat in the airport lounge. Nia curled beside him with Commander Poppy in her lap. The weariness of the day was evident on both their faces, but their spirits were holding firm. For Nia, the promise of finally flying brought a sparkle back to her eyes. For Camden, the responsibility of turning this painful day into a moment of triumph weighed heavily. But he was ready. James Patterson, Horizon Vista's regional director, approached with a reassuring smile. "Camden, we've made sure everything is set. The new crew is briefed, and you have the airline's full support." Camden nodded. "Thank you. James, this means a lot." Nia looked up, tugging gently at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, can I sit in the cockpit this time?" Camden smiled, the warmth in her voice melting some of his tension. "I'm arranging that. Captain Reynolds has agreed." He felt a wave of relief. This small victory meant everything. Boarding began smoothly. The cabin crew, led by senior flight attendant Aisha Johnson, greeted passengers warmly. Her kindness was a balm to the tense atmosphere that had lingered earlier. Her professionalism and genuine care created a calm that was almost contagious. As Camden and Nia settled into their seats, a quiet murmur of support rippled through the cabin. Several passengers whispered words of encouragement or offered discreet smiles. The video footage and news reports had reached many, and their solidarity was palpable. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Good morning, everyone. This is Captain Marcus Reynolds. We're cleared for takeoff. And I want to personally thank you for your patience today. We're committed to making this flight comfortable and safe for all." Camden felt a surge of pride as he listened. The calm authority in Marcus's voice reminded him why he had chosen this career: the trust, the responsibility, the opportunity to lead with dignity. Nia clutched Commander Poppy tightly as the plane began taxiing. "Daddy, we're really flying this time." "Yes, baby, we are." As the wheels lifted off the runway, the rush of acceleration pressed them gently back into their seats. Nia's eyes widened in delight. The sky outside was clear and endless, a brilliant blue canvas stretching beyond the clouds. Camden watched her, remembering how he had once dreamed of this moment with her, the first flight together, filled with wonder instead of fear. The flight attendants moved gracefully through the cabin, offering drinks and snacks. Aisha stopped by their row, kneeling beside Nia with a bright smile. "Hi there. Nia, would you like some apple juice?" Nia nodded enthusiastically. As the beverage service continued, Camden noticed the genuine warmth Aisha showed not just to them, but to all passengers. It was a stark contrast to the cold indifference they had encountered earlier. The flight moved steadily forward. Camden spent time explaining various controls to Nia, who listened intently, peppering him with questions. He marveled at her curiosity and resilience. But even as the flight settled into its rhythm, Camden's mind wasn't at ease. He knew the scars of today's incident would linger, not just for them, but for many others who face similar discrimination in silence. He thought about the conversations he had with airline leadership in recent hours. Commitments to training, policy changes, accountability measures. Words that promised change, but needed action. Camden leaned over to Nia. "You know, baby, sometimes people's fears come from not understanding each other. That's why we have to keep talking, keep showing them who we are." Nia looked up, eyes shining. I want to be a pilot, Daddy, and help people fly safely. His heart swelled. You already are. Zoe, you already are. As the plane cruised above the clouds, Camden decided to speak over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Commander Roy speaking. I want to thank each of you for your patience and understanding today. We've faced challenges, but together, we're making progress. He paused, letting his words settle on. Let today be a reminder that everyone deserves respect and dignity, no matter where they sit or what they look like. A few passengers clapped softly. Camden felt a quiet pride in that moment, a small victory amid the larger struggle. Nia smiled up at him, her hand slipping into his. The rest of the flight passed with moments of laughter, shared stories, and the quiet bond of community that forms when people choose empathy over judgment. When the plane touched down in Atlanta, the warm southern sun greeted them. As they taxied to the gate, passengers around them began to express their thanks and admiration for Camden's composure and courage. Walking off the plane, Camden held Nia close. They were greeted by Evelyn, Nia's grandmother, waiting with open arms. The day had been long and hard, but it ended with love and hope. Camden knew the road ahead was still full of obstacles, but for Nia, for himself, and for every traveler who had faced injustice, this flight was a new beginning. The terminal buzzed with life as Camden, Nia, and Evelyn moved through the crowd. The warmth of the Atlanta sun bathed the scene in a golden light, but the weight of the day lingered in Camden's mind like a quiet storm. The fight was far from over, though the victory of landing safely and being together again felt like a small triumph. Evelyn wrapped Nia in a fierce hug. "My brave girl," she whispered, eyes misty. Nia clung to her grandmother, the comfort evident in her small frame. Camden stood back for a moment, watching them. He was proud of Nia's resilience, but he also felt the sting of the injustice she had endured. How many children like her were forced to carry these burdens in silence? The incident with Horizon Vista had sparked a conversation that was long overdue. Employees, passengers, and advocates had begun to speak out about the systemic issues that permeated the airline industry. It was a collective awakening. That evening, back at their modest Atlanta apartment, Camden sat at the kitchen table, the glow of his laptop illuminating his tired face. He scrolled through news articles and social media posts that chronicled their story. The responses were overwhelming messages of support, shared experiences, and calls for change. But there were also voices of dissent, comments dismissing the incident as a misunderstanding, or worse, blaming Nia and Camden for causing a scene. It was a painful reminder that progress was met with resistance. Camden sighed deeply and leaned back in his chair. His mind drifted to the countless hours he had spent navigating these battles quietly throughout his career, the extra scrutiny in flight school, the passengers who looked away when he introduced himself as captain, the subtle but persistent doubts cast by colleagues and superiors. He thought of his own father, a man who had faced similar challenges in his generation but had fought in silence. Camden was determined to break that cycle. Nia came into the room, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, I'm tired." Camden smiled gently. "You did great today, baby. Let's get you to bed." As he tucked her in, Nia looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. "Will people be nice next time?" Camden brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "They will be better. And if they're not, we'll keep standing up for what's right." The next morning, Camden had a meeting scheduled with Horizon Vista's leadership team, including CEO Whitney Graves and Chief Diversity Officer Marissa Lee. The atmosphere in the conference room was charged but hopeful. Whitney began. "Camden, Thank you for coming. Your courage has ignited important conversations here. We're committed to making meaningful changes." Marissa nodded. "We're rolling out a new training program focused on implicit bias and cultural competency. We're also establishing a passenger advocacy office to ensure incidents like yours are addressed promptly." Camden listened carefully. These steps are promising, but real change requires accountability at every level. It's about transforming culture, not just policies. Whitney agreed. "We're prepared to hold staff accountable and review hiring practices to promote diversity and inclusion." Camden felt a flicker of optimism, but also knew the real work was just beginning. He later shared these updates with Nia, who listened with fascination as he explained how people were learning to be kinder and fairer. Days turned into weeks, and Camden found himself increasingly involved in advocacy work. He spoke at industry conferences and participated in panels discussing racial equity in aviation. Through these efforts, he connected with others who had faced similar discrimination: pilots, flight attendants, and passengers. Their stories were different, but shared the same thread of resilience and the desire for justice. One afternoon, Camden received a call from Marissa Lee. "We're launching the Roy Initiative," she said, "a scholarship and mentorship program to support young people of color pursuing careers in aviation." Camden's voice trembled with emotion. "Thank you, Marissa. This means everything." Back home, Nia continued to grow, her curiosity and passion for flying undimmed. She attended a youth aviation camp where she met children from diverse backgrounds, all dreaming of the sky. Camden watched her with pride, knowing that their journey had not only changed their lives, but had the potential to shift the skies for generations to come. But amidst the progress, Camden remained vigilant. He knew prejudice didn't vanish overnight, and the scars from that day in the airport would sometimes resurface. Late at night, he would find himself reflecting on the internal battles he fought, the anger he suppressed, the fear for his daughter's safety, and the quiet determination that propelled him forward. He wrote in his journal, words flowing as a release and a reminder of why the fight mattered. "I stand not just for myself, but for every child who deserves to dream without fear, for every parent who wants their family to be seen with dignity. For the future we must build." Nia's laughter would fill the room, a bright light against the shadows. Together, they faced the world stronger, united and unyielding. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the runway as Camden Roy stood outside the Horizon Vista hangar, watching the planes taxi and take off into the vast blue sky. For a moment, the world seemed peaceful, a stark contrast to the turbulent weeks that had passed since that fateful day on Flight 423. Camden took a deep breath, savoring the crisp air. Today was different. It was a day of beginnings for him, for Nia, and for a future they both believed in. He glanced down at his phone, a message from James Patterson confirming that the inaugural Roy Initiative Scholarship Award ceremony would be held at the company headquarters next week. He smiled. The seeds of change were taking root. Inside, the conference room was bustling with energy. Horizon Vista's leadership team, advocates, scholarship recipients, and their families had gathered for a celebration of opportunity and hope. Camden's eyes caught those of Marissa Lee, who gave him an encouraging nod. As he stepped to the podium, the room quieted. Camden's voice was steady but filled with emotion as he began to speak. "When I was young, I dreamed of flying, but I also knew that not everyone saw people who looked like me in the cockpit. The barriers were real, and the challenges were many. But today, we take a step toward changing that." He looked out at the faces before him, eager young men and women of color ready to claim their place in the skies. This scholarship is not just financial aid, it's a promise that your dreams matter, that you belong in this industry, and that we will stand with you every step of the way. Applause filled the room, a chorus of hope and solidarity. Later, Camden found Nia sitting quietly by the window, coloring a new picture, a pilot's uniform embroidered with the Roy Initiative logo. "Are you ready for your first lesson?" Zoe Camden asked, smiling. Nia's eyes lit up. "Yes, Daddy. I want to fly higher than ever." The weeks that followed brought a renewed sense of purpose to Camden's life. His advocacy work expanded beyond the airline, connecting with organizations committed to diversity and inclusion across industries. Each conversation was a step toward dismantling systemic barriers. Each story shared a beacon of resilience. Yet, Camden remained grounded in his personal mission, nurturing Nia's love for aviation and instilling in her the strength to face the world with courage and grace. One afternoon, as they visited the local aviation museum, Nia tugged at his hand. "Daddy, look at this," she said, pointing to a vintage pilot's jacket on display. "It's beautiful," Camden replied. Nia looked up earnestly. "One day, I want to wear something like that. But I want to be the best pilot, the kind who makes flying safe and fair for everyone." Camden hugged her tightly. "And you will be, Zoe. I believe in you." That evening, as they sat on their small balcony, watching the city lights twinkle, Camden reflected on the journey they had undertaken, the challenges, the pain, the victories all woven into the fabric of their lives. He thought about the day Nia was asked to leave the plane, the whispers and stares, the cold dismissal from the crew, how that moment of humiliation had sparked a fire, one that would not be extinguished. Camden knew there were still battles to fight, still hearts and minds to change. But the path ahead was illuminated by the courage of those willing to stand and speak, to demand dignity and justice. He looked at Nia, who was already dreaming beyond the horizon. Her future as limitless as the sky above. As the stars emerged, Camden whispered a promise to himself and to his daughter. "We will keep flying, Zoe, higher and farther than ever before." The story of Camden and Nia Roy became more than a tale of injustice and resilience. It became a symbol, a call to action for industries to examine their practices, for communities to embrace inclusion, and for individuals to recognize the power of standing together against discrimination. And as Flight 423 soared above the clouds once more, piloted by a crew transformed by lessons learned and hearts opened, the skies grew a little wider, a little kinder. The evening shadows stretched long across the airport runway as Camden Roy sat alone in a quiet corner of the Horizon Vista Lounge. His thoughts were heavy, the adrenaline of recent victories slowly giving way to the weight of reality. Despite the progress they had made, a familiar unease gnawed at him, a reminder that change, though essential, rarely comes without resistance. He glanced at his phone and saw messages from friends and colleagues. Many offered words of encouragement, but others spoke of setbacks and frustrations. The airline industry, like many others, was wrestling with its own ingrained biases and structural obstacles. Camden closed his eyes for a moment, recalling the countless times he had faced discrimination subtle, overt, and everything in between. The stares when he walked through the terminal, the assumptions about his competence, the whispers that lingered just beyond hearing. It was exhausting. Yet, he knew that his strength came not from avoiding the shadows, but from confronting them. A soft voice interrupted his reverie. "Camden, are you okay?" Nia stood at the edge of his seat, her dark eyes filled with concern. She clutched Commander Poppy tightly, as if sensing his tension. He smiled softly. "I'm fine. Zoe, just thinking." She climbed onto his lap and looked up at him with unwavering trust. "Daddy, you don't have to be strong all the time. It's okay to feel scared or tired." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For years, he had shouldered the burden silently, believing that showing vulnerability was a sign of weakness. But here was his daughter, teaching him that true strength includes embracing all parts of oneself. Camden wrapped his arms around her. "Thank you, baby. That means more than you know." The next morning, Camden arrived early at Horizon Vista headquarters for a series of meetings with the leadership team and the newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Council. The air was thick with purpose and urgency. Whitney Graves, the airline's CEO, opened the discussion. "We've made strides, but the path ahead is long. Today, we focus on tangible actions, accountability, transparency, and community engagement." Marissa Lee presented data revealing the persistent disparities in hiring, promotion, and customer experiences faced by employees and passengers of color. The statistics were sobering, a call to arms. Camden listened intently, his voice rising during the open forum. "It's not enough to acknowledge these problems. We must dismantle the systems that allow them to persist. That means revising policies, retraining staff, and creating safe spaces for dialogue." Several executives nodded, but others remained guarded, defensive even. Change threatened the comfort of the status quo, and resistance simmered beneath polite agreements. Later, Camden met privately with James Patterson. "We need allies at every level," James said. "Some leaders are hesitant. They see this as a risk." Camden's eyes hardened with resolve. "It's not a risk. It's a necessity. We owe it to the future of this industry." In the days that followed, Camden balanced advocacy with his role as a pilot and father. He spent evenings helping Nia with her homework, sharing stories of perseverance and hope. She listened with wide eyes, absorbing lessons that would shape her view of the world. One afternoon, during a flight to Chicago, Camden noticed subtle changes among the cabin crew. They greeted passengers more warmly, engaged with genuine interest, and demonstrated a renewed commitment to fairness. A fellow pilot approached him afterward. "Camden, I've seen the difference you're making. It's inspiring." Camden shrugged modestly. "It's not just me. It's all of us who refuse to accept injustice." Back home, as the city lights flickered outside their window, Camden found himself reflecting on the balance between strength and vulnerability. He journaled late into the night. "I am learning that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it openly. To show my daughter that being human means sometimes struggling and still moving forward. That is the legacy I want to leave." Nia's laughter echoed from the next room, a reminder of light amidst the shadows. The journey was far from over, but Camden knew that with each step, they were forging a path toward a future where dignity and respect were not privileges, but rights. The early morning light filtered softly through the airplane cabin as Camden Roy prepared for another flight. Today was not just any day, it was a moment laden with purpose, a continuation of a journey that had challenged him in ways he never imagined. The echoes of that difficult day on Flight 423 still lingered, but so did the determination that had carried him forward. Camden adjusted his pilot's uniform, the familiar weight of the fabric grounding him. His eyes flicked to the photo taped inside his flight bag, a candid shot of Nia holding Commander Poppy, smiling broadly on a bright spring day. That photo was more than a keepsake. It was a reminder of why he fought so hard. As he reviewed the pre-flight checklist with calm precision, His mind wandered back to the quiet moments at home, the late-night conversations with Nia, and the countless meetings pushing for change within Horizon Vista. Each challenge had strengthened his resolve. The co-pilot, Daniel Martinez, arrived shortly, a seasoned pilot and longtime colleague. Daniel greeted Camden warmly. "Ready for another day of making skies safer?" Camden smiled. "Always." Their camaraderie was a steady anchor, a shared commitment to excellence and integrity. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Camden's voice came smoothly over the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Commander Roy speaking. Thank you for choosing Horizon Vista today. We're committed to providing a safe and respectful journey for every passenger." He could feel the weight of those words. This was more than a routine announcement. It was a statement of principle. Throughout the flight, Camden remained attentive not only to his duties, but also to the atmosphere in the cabin. He noticed the flight attendants' renewed attentiveness and the subtle but genuine smiles exchanged with passengers. The air felt lighter. During a brief pause in cruise altitude, Camden took a moment to reflect. The path ahead was still filled with obstacles, resistance from some corners, moments of doubt, and the persistent shadow of discrimination. Yet, the progress made was undeniable. At home, Nia had grown more confident, her passion for aviation deepening. Camden often found her with her nose buried in flight manuals or building paper airplanes with meticulous care. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Nia turned to him. "Daddy, do you think I can really change things?" Camden pulled her close. "I know you can. Zoe, you already are." He thought about the lessons he wanted to pass on: courage, empathy, and the power of standing firm in one's truth. Later that week, Camden met with a group of young aspiring pilots at a local community center. The Roy Initiative Scholarship recipients gathered eagerly, their faces alight with hope. Camden shared his story, the struggles, the pain, and the victories. He emphasized that the road was never easy, but that resilience and community could overcome even the darkest challenges. One young woman raised her hand. "Commander Roy, what kept you going when things got hard?" He smiled thoughtfully. "My daughter, my family, and the belief that change is possible if we refuse to give up." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. As the months passed, Camden's role expanded beyond the cockpit. He became a mentor, an advocate, and a voice for those often unheard. But with every step forward, he remained acutely aware of the personal toll, the emotional labor, the constant vigilance, and the balancing act of protecting Nia's innocence while preparing her for a world that wasn't always kind. One quiet night, Camden sat alone, journal in hand, grappling with the weight of it all. "I wonder if I'm enough," he wrote, "if my efforts can truly make a difference. But then I remember her smile, her hope, and I know I must keep going. For her and for all who follow." The resolve was unshakable. Camden's journey was far from over, but with each flight, each conversation, and each act of courage, he was charting a course toward a more just sky. For Nia, for the future, for every soul longing to soar without limits. The atmosphere in the Horizon Vista boardroom was tense, but charged with purpose, as Camden Roy stepped up to speak before the airline's top executives. This was not just another meeting. It was a pivotal moment, a turning point in the airline's commitment to dismantle the systemic discrimination that had marred its reputation and compromised the dignity of countless passengers like Camden and his daughter. "Nia." Camden's calm, steady voice filled the room. "We cannot afford to treat this as an isolated incident. The events of Flight 423 expose deeper issues, biases that persist at every level, from ground staff to leadership. This is a call to action." Whitney Graves nodded solemnly. "Camden, your courage in bringing these issues forward has opened eyes and hearts. We are ready to listen and act. But real change requires collaboration, accountability from all of us." Marissa Lee presented the latest findings from their ongoing review, showing improvements but also areas where bias still subtly influenced decisions. The data was stark, but necessary to confront. Camden addressed the executives directly. "Policies alone won't change culture. We need transparent reporting, continuous education, and a zero-tolerance stance on discrimination. Most importantly, we need to empower employees and passengers to speak up without fear of retaliation." The room absorbed his words. For some, it was a reckoning; for others, an awakening. Later that day, Camden received a call from James Patterson. "Camden, the board has approved the new anti-discrimination task force. They want you to co-chair it alongside Marissa." A swell of pride and responsibility rose within him. "Thank you, James. I'm honored." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, trainings, and outreach programs. Camden poured himself into the work, balancing his pilot duties and advocacy with unwavering dedication. Nia watched her father transform into a leader not only in the cockpit, but in the fight for justice. She admired his strength and calm resolve, but also his willingness to show vulnerability. One evening, as they shared a quiet dinner, Nia asked softly, "Daddy, do you ever get scared?" Camden looked at her, his eyes reflecting both honesty and wisdom. "Sometimes, Zoe, but courage isn't about never being scared. It's about doing what's right despite fear." Her face lit up with understanding. "I want to be brave like you." He reached across the table, holding her hand. "And you will be. You already are." At the same time, Horizon Vista's efforts began to show results. Passenger complaints about discrimination decreased, and the airline's new inclusivity training earned praise from industry groups. Employees reported feeling more valued and supported. But Camden knew the fight was ongoing. There were still shadows to confront, systemic barriers to dismantle, and hearts to change. One afternoon, while preparing for a flight, Camden reflected on how far he and Nia had come since that painful day on the jetway. The memory was still vivid, the confusion, the whispers, the unjust removal. But it was now intertwined with hope and progress. He looked forward to the day when no child would have to fear discrimination while flying, when dignity and respect were guaranteed for all passengers, regardless of race or background. That day was drawing closer. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon as Camden Roy stood in the cockpit of Horizon Vista Flight 501 preparing for takeoff. The hum of the engines was familiar and comforting, a steady rhythm that mirrored the beat of his own heart. Today was more than a routine flight. It was a symbol of hope, progress, and the promise of a better future. Camden glanced over at Nia, seated in the jump seat beside him, her eyes wide with wonder and excitement. Commander Poppy, the stuffed bunny who had accompanied her through every twist and turn of their journey, sat securely buckled in the seat beside her. This moment was a culmination of everything they had endured and accomplished. The cabin crew moved with a renewed sense of purpose and warmth, greeting passengers with genuine smiles and attentiveness that spoke of real change. The atmosphere inside the plane was lighter, infused with a spirit of inclusion and respect. As Camden addressed the passengers over the intercom, his voice was steady and clear. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Commander Roy speaking. Thank you for joining us on this flight. Today, we not only travel from one city to another, but we also celebrate the progress we have made together in creating a more just and equitable airline experience. He paused, allowing his words to resonate. We are committed to ensuring that every passenger feels valued and respected, regardless of background. This commitment is reflected in our policies, our training, and most importantly, in our actions. Nia looked up at him, her face glowing with pride. Camden smiled, knowing that this flight was as much for her as it was for all those who had stood beside them. The takeoff was smooth, the plane lifting gracefully into the sky. As they ascended, Camden reflected on the journey that had brought them here, the painful moments of discrimination, the resilience they had shown, the allies they had found, and the systemic changes they had helped initiate. Each flight was now a testament to the power of standing up for what is right and the importance of never giving up hope. During the flight, Camden spent time explaining the controls to Nia, encouraging her curiosity and passion. She asked questions with a bright enthusiasm that reminded him of his own early days dreaming of the skies. After settling into cruise altitude, Camden invited Nia to look out the window. The clouds stretched endlessly beneath them, a vast expanse of white against the blue. Look, Zoe, the sky is wide open. Just like your future. Nia smiled, clutching Commander Poppy. I want to fly high and make sure everyone can fly without fear. Camden's heart swelled. She was already a beacon of change, a reminder that the future was bright if they continued to fight for it. As the plane began its descent into their destination, Camden spoke again to the passengers. Let today remind us that progress is possible when we come together, when we refuse to accept injustice as normal. Thank you for being part of this journey. The landing was met with applause, a celebration of more than just a safe arrival, a celebration of transformation. After the flight, Camden and Nia were greeted by a crowd of supporters, friends, and colleagues. Evelyn hugged them both tightly, her eyes shining with tears of joy. This was a new chapter where dignity, respect, and justice were no longer aspirations, but realities. Camden looked at Nia, the embodiment of hope and resilience. This is just the beginning. Zoe, together, we will keep flying toward a better tomorrow. The journey ahead was still long and complex, but they were no longer alone. The skies were opening up for everyone willing to soar. Camden and Nia's story is a powerful reminder that discrimination, no matter how subtle or blatant, leaves deep wounds, especially when it targets the innocent. Their courage to stand firm in the face of injustice shows us that change is possible, but only when we refuse to stay silent. This is not just a story about one family's fight on a single flight. It is a call to action for every one of us to recognize and challenge the biases that continue to divide us. Let us honor the resilience of those like Camden and Nia by committing ourselves to fairness, respect, and empathy in every corner of life, from the airport gate to the boardroom and beyond. Thank you for watching this journey unfold. If their story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to support our mission of telling stories that inspire justice and humanity. Stay tuned for more eye-opening tales that confront hard truths and celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Together, our voices create change. Your voice matters.